yeah, we start delving into what we're going to be over the next. Yeah, I think you're on mute trying to.
Sorry, yeah.
No.
No,
Okay.
you went quiet there at the end. Your sound seems to
Okay.
in and out a little bit there, but
Okay.
no, that was great. You did. I think everyone got most of that. Um, what about you, Grace? Anything else that you could add that you, learned
Um,
or just?
I actually had a bit of trouble hearing the last half of what Ali said then. Unfortunately, it was dipping in and out a lot. Sorry. I think probably the things that really were highlights, well, stuck out in my mind was just the discussion of yoga. I think Ali spoke about that like briefly about what is yoga, both in terms of how we would define it and what it is to us. And we did our practice, what things we could remember, the Sanskrit names for those postures. I thought it was interesting actually talking a little bit about the language aspect. Like that was something that really stuck out for me was how it relates to the philosophy side of things itself and the history of yoga. Yeah, that's predominantly what I remember.
Fantastic, thanks, Grace. So, look, without further ado, let's get stuck into our lecture today. So firstly, though, I mean, you all got your no one printed their manuals, yeah? Good. Because yeah, we need to realign the index. I don't know if you've managed to maybe go through it yet, but the index doesn't quite align. So that's been presently done. So we'll get a new one in the mail soon, in the email. And then, I mean, look, it's up to you. It's your choice whether you do want to print those manuals, but it does, I mean, if you're more of a person that reads, let's say, Kindles or reads things from the iPad, then I guess you could have it on a Google Drive and read it on an iPad or on a Kindle. But if you're anything like me, I like to have a nice hard copy, learn the papers, get old school like that. So I'll definitely be printing mine when it's ready. But yeah, that's your choice. But yeah, hopefully next week. Some of our lectures focus a lot on the manual, and then some of them we don't really go into the manual much at all. Like even today's, there's not a whole lot on the history of yoga in the manual. So it'll be more me chatting. I'm going to show you a little movie as well today. Get to watch a little video, which is nice. And then yeah, just more of me just talking about a little bit about the history of yoga. I think I'm going to actually move inside because I struggle to see in the sunlight. As nice as it is having the sun on my body, I think I'll be better off inside. So let's have a little maybe 3 minute or so break. If you want to go to the toilet, tea break, or whatever. And yeah, we'll see each other in about three or so minutes. Hello. Welcome back. My life not only changed when I started doing yoga, but since I bought a frother. I just bought a frother last week. Frothing machine for your coffees and for your chais. And it's
Game changer.
changed my life. It seriously has. I'm a completely different person now.
Yeah, I've got friends who are just like, I never need to go to a cafe again. I've got everything I need right here.
That's what it's like. It's wonderful.
I don't think I need more enticement to drink coffee or tea. I'm already pretty like at the stage of where you wake up and you've got a headache, and I think a frother would just be the end. Like there's no limit.
That's true. Yeah, I actually, admittedly, I'm having 2 cups a day rather than usually 1.
Is that of coffee or chai? Because
This
I
is the
think chai
chai,
would be.
actually. This is the chai.
Oh, well then you're fine. You're fine.
But I'm
Chai send me to sleep.
I'm talking coffee. I am,
Okay.
you know, mainly excited about the coffee, but it actually makes a nice chai as well.
What kind of milk do you prefer?
Soy, generally.
Yeah, it's good for cream, for frothing.
Yeah, if I'm drinking milk, I'd rather drink almond or coconut, like in cereal or porridge or whatever. Oh, there was a killer whale there for a second. But yeah, somehow in the coffee or the chai, well, especially for frothing, the soy is better than the others, I think.
Yeah, like I really like oat milk, but it's just sometimes really, really thick. And cocoa quench is pretty good as well, but they're expensive. Just a little hint: if you ever feel like having some coconut milk, that froths really well.
Okay, I haven't tried coconut milk yet.
Yeah, cocoa quench in particular, like the specific brand. So
Yeah, I've actually got one of those up on the shelf. So,
well, there you go. Careful though, it's a slippery slope.
Another addiction.
Yeah.
All right, are we all here now? Elaine is still on her way. What I'm going to do soon, I'm going to talk about a couple of things first, but in probably half an hour or so, as I said, we're going to watch a movie. So for the movie, what I'll do is I send you a link, and then you can watch it from the link. Just because when I do the share screen, it doesn't always work out all that well. So is everyone technically okay to receive a link and watch something from a link? I was more worried about you, Sarah, being in the park. Are you on your phone? But even so, that should be okay, yeah? You should be able to access a link from the phone. Cool. All right. So if we could, and if you don't have it handy, but if you have your manual handy, and if you're able to access that, and let's see. As I said, this is a totally new manual, so I'm still quite unfamiliar with it. I mean, a lot of it's going to be a reflection of the last manual, of course, but they are constantly evolving, these manuals. So so there could be new things in there that I don't know about, or alternatively, things aren't there that were in the last one. So history of yoga, in the table of contents, it says page 52, but it won't be quite that. It'll be, here we go, page 64. 64. And then 65 is what is prana. So in actual fact, there's hardly anything here for the history of yoga in the manual. But let's just have a quick read through this, because I think it's going to bring us into a little bit of a subject that I was hoping to explore at some point. And
sorry, Mickey, also, just in case you don't know, there's another section on the history of yoga at page 251.
wow, thank you. There we go. So that's that is what I wanted to know. Well, was that in the index, or did you just happen to find it? Ah, okay. So there is quite a lot there. Yeah. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm. Okay, it might actually be better to start on that one there, because that's a little bit more in depth. The one on page 62 or whatnot was really concerning another subject which ties into the history, but we'll go into that a bit later. I think would be better. So in that case, let's do that. Let's turn to page 251. So has everyone got a copy that they can access? Yeah.
I can access from my phone. Is it okay?
Yeah. Can you access it from your phone?
Yeah.
Good. So one thing I mentioned last week was the fact that sometimes a lot of this information that you're going to be receiving can be potentially sometimes a little bit in the wow, too hard basket, and you know, that's a little basket that you keep with you along your journey. So if something doesn't quite make sense, you put it in that basket, and potentially, and well, usually at some later date, it'll either make sense to you or you readdress it at a later stage. But at the same time, I do welcome questions along the way. So if there's anything that's really nagging you, like what does that mean, or what do we mean by that, or whatnot, then please go ahead and ask. And I don't always have the answers, but sometimes I do. So we'll do our best. So if we have a look at that history of yoga, it says we could divide yoga into two main sections: left wing, tantrics, agoris, non-dual, magicians, siddhas, advaita. So probably half of that you don't understand, but that's all fine. We will explore a lot of that over the time. But that's left wing being a certain trajectory of yoga, and then right wing, the yogis, the hatha, duality, Vedanta. So learning about the history of yoga, the roots of this ancient practice and tradition. 15,000 years ago, a man sat still for days, unmoving. The only thing that was moving was tears of ecstasy. Over time, people started to leave, but 7 people realized the phenomenon of the stillness. They became the 7 rishis. They asked the man how we can be like you. He started to give them a few methods to explain the mechanics of enlightenment. It's on this day yoga was born. The United Nations even recognized this day as the National Day of Yoga. this predated all religion. He went into the mechanics of how to be human. He said there's only 112 possibilities to generate the mechanics. If you transcend the body, you can go beyond. He then asked the 7 rishis to go separate continents and share the spiritual processes with the world. So basically what that's just telling us is that yoga is potentially 15,000 years old. I mean, we don't really know that because our history books don't go that far back. It's a little bit of a supposition. But we do know that the most ancient text that we have, the Vedas, go back for quite some thousand years. So we'll continue. Sanskrit, the Indo-European language of the Vedas, India's ancient religious texts gave birth to both the literature and the technique of yoga. One definition of the word Sanskrit is a well-formed, refined, perfect, or polished. Connotes substance and clarity, qualities exemplified in the practice of yoga. It's also been called the language of the gods, the language like a computer. The Sanskrit word yoga has several translations. So, yes, we understand that yoga has its roots in the ancient Indo-Aryan civilization, where Sanskrit may have been the spoken language. We don't know that for sure, but it was definitely the recorded written language from those ancient times. And it's a magical language in many ways. What really resonates for me with Sanskrit is its the fact that it's a vibratory language. It's focused on vibrations, not just sound, but also certain vibrations, which I'm sure you would have experienced even just with, let's say, chanting an Om chant. I mean, the vibration that happens when you chant Om has a certain effect of calming the mind and bringing us into that kind of peaceful place or state. I mean, the Om itself has a deeper meaning and a deeper energy, but all the various mantras, all the various verses in Sanskrit, it's like a language of song, of sound, of vibration. So they're kind of meant to be somewhat sung. The language is meant to be recited, almost like poetry, but with a certain harmony to it. So yeah, it's like a song. Sanskrit is like a song, and every sound has an effect on us on various levels. So the word yoga comes from the root yug, and originally meant to hitch up, as in attaching a horse to a vehicle. Another definition was to put to active and purposeful use. Still other translations are to yoke, to join, or concentrate. Yoga has come to describe a means of uniting, a method of discipline, and it's a science of consciousness. A male who practices this discipline is called a yogi or yogin, and a female practitioner is a yogini. Yoga is not a religion, although it does come from Hindu religion. It's a branch off that, and it's not regarded as a religion. There's a few spelling mistakes in here too. I'll have to let Amy know. So that's an interesting relationship as far as the Hindu religion goes. So I would say it's the other way around. I would say that actually the Hindu religion was born out of some of the yogic truths or the yogic wisdom. But yes, as a yogi, as a yogini, there's no need. There's no you don't have to be aligned to the religion of Hinduism. If anyone practices any other religion, yoga is perfectly fine to align with any religion. I mean, yoga is essentially the inquiry into truth, which religions are to some degree as well. But I guess one of the differences between yoga and a religion is that most religions will tell you how it is in their way, whereas in the yoga philosophy, the idea is not to believe everything that you're told, but to approach this philosophy as a science and as an art, in the sense that make it experiential until you actually experience what you're being taught. Until then, just consider it as a possibility, but see it as your truth only once it's become your truth from an experiential aspect. Does that make sense? So feel free along the way if you want to just put your hand up and pause and ask a question or anything. Happy to elaborate or chit chat about things.
We're enjoying it, Celia.
It's not regarded as a belief system, but rather an existential science of experimentation in the now. There you go. That's a better way to say what I was rambling on about. To cease the fluctuations of the mind and to become present. Yoga comes out of an oral tradition in which the teachings were transmitted directly from teacher to student. The Indian sage Patanjali has been credited with the collection or the collation of this oral tradition in his classical work, the Yoga Sutras, a 2,000-year-old treatise on yogic philosophy. A collection of 195 statements, the sutra provides a kind of philosophical guidebook for dealing with the challenges of being human. Giving guidance on how to gain mastery over the mind and emotions and deep knowledge on how to spiritually grow, the Yoga Sutras provides the platform, integral foundation upon which most yoga practices today are based. Literally meaning thread, sutra has also been translated as aphorism, which means a tersely phrased statement of truth. Another definition of sutra is the condensation of the greatest amount of knowledge into the most concise description possible. Yoga is the study of consciousness that allows us to access the infinite knowledge that every human can access. So the Yoga Sutras, when that was written by Patanjali, in theory, a couple of 100 years after the time of Buddha. It's not known exactly. We don't have great records for timelines back then, but around about then, so over 2,000 years old. The Yoga Sutras was that kind of pivotal point in the history of yoga where I guess the teachings of yoga were recorded. So up until then, we've got the Upanishads and the ancient Vedas, which are more ancient texts, I believe. Double check about the Upanishads. Maybe the Upanishads aren't, but definitely the Vedas are the most ancient writings that are known to man. But it's a lot more kind of written as stories, written as rituals and whatnot. There is definitely lots of ancient knowledge in those writings, but the sutras kind of like condensed it all and really brought in yoga as we have it today, what the teachings are from. Probably, from that Hatha and Raja Yoga perspective. So initially, the discipline of Hatha Yoga, the physical aspect of yoga, was developed as a vehicle for meditation. The yogi of Hatha Yoga prepares the body, and particularly the nervous system, for stillness, creating the necessary physical strength and stamina that allowed the mind to remain calm. The word Hatha also has several translations, with Ha meaning sun and Ta meaning moon. We have the common interpretation of Hatha Yoga as union of the pairs of opposites. But another technical translation of Hatha Yoga is force or determined effort. Thus, Hatha Yoga, the yoga of activity, is a yoga that addresses the body and mind and requires discipline and effort. It's a yoga that we can feel, that we can experience right here and right now. Hatha Yoga is a powerful method of self-transformation. It's the most practical of the yogas, and sages have recommended its practice in some form for millennia as preparation for all the other yogas. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is a key text of the yoga school of Hinduism. Hatha Yoga is essentially the yoga that we are studying. So Vinyasa and a lot of the other modern styles of yoga, which use the asana practice, come under the umbrella of Hatha Yoga. Hatha, the yoga of effort. So that's one translation. It's so we need to make some kind of effort to work with our yoga practice, to develop the fruits of the yoga practice. A certain effort is required. But also there is that other aspect of Hatha Yoga, which Ha meaning sun and Ta meaning moon. So it's kind of like yin and yang, sun and moon. Energy are the two polarities within us. And Hatha Yoga is, as such, the balancing of those two polarities. And we go into a lot of depth about that at a later date, particularly through our pranayama. So within the Yoga Sutras, and the Yoga Sutras sometimes could be seen as more the Raja Yoga path, but definitely the Hatha Yoga path is aligned to the sutras as well. And Raja Yoga is also, in some ways, one thing we need to realize that there's often a lot of interweaving between the various ideals, philosophies, and streams of yoga. So it's not like this is one thing and that's another thing and they're completely separate. There's often an interweaving going on. So Raja Yoga is the yoga of the mind. So in many ways, a lot of what Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras is focused on the yoga of the mind. So when I say yoga of the mind, understanding our minds, first of all, understanding how our minds work, and then ultimately understanding or developing tools to be able to then go beyond the mind into the state of enlightenment. But we can't achieve that until, first of all, we have a full understanding of the mind itself. So self-inquiry is our practice there, which then aligns with our meditation practice. And that in itself is still a part of Hatha Yoga. So while Hatha Yoga is often seen as the physical part of yoga, because we work with the asana and that has become the dominant sort of focus in the West, particularly because of our obsessions with our bodies. We have focused very much on that physical aspect, and so people have sort of come to yoga because of the physical benefits often, but also knowing somewhat that it receives some kind of mental and emotional, psycho-emotional benefits as well. We feel good after our yoga classes. We feel more relaxed. We feel more at ease. So, you know, Hatha Yoga is kind of all of that, but it still somewhat incorporates the Raja Yoga aspect. But some yogis align a little more to the Raja aspect, and some more to the Hatha, maybe some more just to the asana practice. It just depends on one's alignment. But his Patanjali's recipe for the pathway is the 8 limbs of yoga. So that's in the second pada. The Yoga Sutras are divided into 4 padas, meaning chapters, let's say. And the second pada, and next week actually we'll go straight into the Yoga Sutras as one of our lectures. So we'll go a little more into detail with the Yoga Sutras. But the second pada is exploring the 8 limbs of yoga as the recipe towards our goal of enlightenment, essentially. Self-realization, realizing the self. Okay, so have a little pause. Any questions at all from what I've been rambling on about so far?
Mickey, could you just explain the difference between asanas and hatha?
Sure. So asana is as there's a little Charlie coming in and out of the picture. Oh no, it's Cat. Asana is essentially the postures, the physical postures. So it's the 4th limb of yoga in Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga. So it's all the postures. And so Vinyasa yoga, let's say, has a big emphasis on asana because we work with our postures, we work with our physical practice. So it's using the body. It's a practice that allows the body to become more vital. So we become healthier, more vital, stronger, more flexible, all the wonderful benefits that we are aware of when we practice our asana practice regularly. So the asana, I mean, literally translated, asana means a comfortable seat to be sat in. So meaning that we're comfortable in our bodies. So many people are not comfortable in their bodies. You know, we've got different conditions going on. Our bodies are stiff, they're tight. There's all sorts of diseases and all sorts of issues. But we know that if we work hard at developing our bodies through a certain physical practice, then the body becomes more comfortable to be in. So the asana is the practice of making the body more vital, healthy, through these various postures. Now, hatha yoga means it's the full practice, which incorporates, look at a basic level, it incorporates the asana, but it also incorporates the pranayama, the breath work, and then it also incorporates our meditation practice to some degree. So hatha is the umbrella of these various practices that we do, which we could call that yoga, really. It's the combination of these various practices. But it's often aligned with the physical aspect because to differentiate, let's say, from some of the other streams of yoga, let's say Raja Yoga, which in some ways is a part of, it's where it gets a little confusing, but also a little interwoven. So Raja Yoga is, let's say, it's also a part of Hatha Yoga. So the mindfulness, the meditation part of Hatha Yoga is essentially Raja Yoga. So Raja Yoga could be seen as a section of Hatha Yoga, which some people like to focus on more prominently as their practice, let's say. Whereas Hatha Yoga incorporates it all to some degree. It's quite a kind of all-encompassing part of yoga. So then we've got, let's say, Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga is the intellectual part of yoga. So we are practicing some of that too, just by studying the texts. When you read the scriptures, when you read the ancient texts, you're developing your intellect. You're starting to acquire certain sort of knowledge and understanding, and that aspect is the Jnana Yoga. Jnana means knowledge, understanding. Then there's Bhakti Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga is the yoga of devotion. So often we see, let's say, people who are into their chanting, into their mantra, and people aligning, let's say, with, from a traditional sense, with some of the deities that you see in yoga. We dove into this quite deep yesterday in our other TT group. We were exploring the Kundalini energy. And Kundalini energy is, there's a certain alignment with some of the deities. So we'll go into detail when we go into that subject at some point. But let's say the deity of Shiva. Shiva represents, and these deities, which, and this is where sometimes the difference between Hinduism as a religion and yoga as a path can differ slightly. So in Hinduism, there's often this kind of idea of these gods as gods. So Shiva as the god Shiva. In yoga, we see Shiva as a stream of energy, as a representation of a certain type of energy. So Shiva is the energy of consciousness. So the all-pervading consciousness, God consciousness or universal consciousness, or however way you want to call that, that is Shiva. So the Bhakti Yogi is, might align with certain gods, but knowing that these gods are really just a certain energy that they're wanting to align with. But then when we take it to the female deities, the female deities are generally aligned with the Shakti energy. And Shakti energy is, we'll go into that again in more detail at some point, is the Kundalini energy. But it's also the energy that pervades all the manifest world, all of creation. So in a way, Shakti energy is the energy of nature. So the alignment with a lot of the female goddesses, such as, say, Kali or Durga, is a deep reverence in our heart for the beauty of nature, simply put. So in many ways, we already have these alignments. We already have, when we go out into nature and we marvel at its beauty, we are, in a sense, being bhakti yogis. But from a traditional point of view, from this yogic tradition, there's certain rituals and there's certain sort of ceremonies and traditions that have formed to color this kind of devotional practice. So in India, for example, most yogis are actually not as much as, because here in the West, Hatha yoga is the most popular form of yoga, no doubt. But in India, and so we would think, oh, well, it must be the same in India where yoga comes from. But it's not so. In India, Bhakti yoga is a lot more popular than Hatha yoga. There's a lot more Bhakti yogis. So the yoga of devotion is more commonplace than the yoga of practicing asana, pranayama, meditation.
I just have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This talking about the the 8 limbs of yoga and everything like that. Is that in this? Is this that book? Is that what we're meant to be reading?
Yep.
I may have not started any reading yet, so I just think it would be useful to have direction about where to start. I'm gonna be overwhelmed with all of the stuff. Yeah.
I'll give you a little some suggestions at the end because
Okay.
we want to dive into that next week. So we've got actually all up. We've got over this course. We're going to have 3 different days on the Yoga Sutras, which is really good actually because in the previous course we only had 1. So we've actually elaborated our time to spend on the Yoga Sutras, which I think is really important. I welcome that change to the structure slightly. So first of all, not to have the expectation to read that whole book, Jacinta, not to have the expectation to get to understand it all, to know it all. I still haven't read it all. I'm perfectly honest with you. I just read bits and pieces as I need to, as I want to. I mean, I probably have read it all actually, but not all in one foul swoop, not from front cover to cover. Because even though it's actually, I think I might have told you last week, the Yoga Sutras, if you sort of wrote them down just as they're in their Sanskrit form, just on a page, you'd literally have just maybe one big A3 page and it's all there. It's, you don't even need a book to contain them all in. It's not all that much writing. But we need a whole book to try and understand them because every verse is just charged with so much power, so much knowledge, so much information. So we need to read the translation and then we need to read the transliteration. So the translations obviously, just as best we can translate into English, but then we usually have another page or 2 of making sense of that. So this, this 200-hour course wouldn't be enough to fully understand the Yoga Sutras. So we're only just going to really, in some ways, I mean, as best as we can, but touching the surface with the Yoga Sutras. And it becomes, hopefully, for you, like it is for me, becomes a lifetime passion of just trying to, unfold the understandings of all these various ancient texts and whatnot. Okay. So now we'll keep reading here, and then we'll have a little break and watch the movie. I think it'd be nice. But let's just read the origin of yoga now. So from this perspective, we know that yoga originated in India 5,000 years or more ago. Until recently, many Western scholars thought that yoga originated much later, maybe around 500 BC, which was the time of Gautama the Buddha. the illustrious founder of Buddhism. But then in the early 20s, archaeologists surprised the world with the so-called discovery of the Indus civilization, a culture that we now know extended over an area of roughly 300,000 square miles, which is the size of Texas and Ohio combined. This was in fact the largest civilization in early antiquity. In the ruins of the big cities of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, excavators found depictions engraved on soapstone seals that strongly resemble yogi-like figures. Many other finds show the amazing continuity between that civilization and later Hindu society and culture. There was nothing primitive about what is now called the Indus-Sarasvati civilization, which is named after two great rivers that once flowed through northern India. Today, only the Indus River flows through Pakistan. That civilization's urban population enjoyed multi-story buildings, a sewage system unparalleled in the ancient world until the Roman Empire, a huge public bath whose walls were waterproofed with bitumen, geometrically laid out brick roads, and standardized baked bricks for convenient construction. We are so used to these technological achievements that we sometimes forget they had to be invented. The Indus-Sarasvati people were a great maritime nation that exported a large variety of goods to Mesopotamia and other parts of the Middle East and Africa. Although only a few pieces of art have survived, some of them show exquisite craftsmanship. For a long time, scholars thought that this magnificent civilization was abruptly destroyed by invaders from the northwest who called themselves Aryans. Arya meaning noble in the Sanskrit language. Some propose that these warlike nomads invented yoga. Others credited the Indus people with its creation. Yet others took yoga to be the joint creation of both races. Nowadays, researchers increasingly paint a completely different picture of ancient Indian history. They're coming to the conclusion that there never was an Aryan invasion and that the decline of the Indus-Sarasvati cities was due to dramatic changes in climate. Hello, climate change back then. These in turn appear to have been caused by a major tectonic catastrophe, changing the course of the rivers. In particular, it led to the drying up of what was once India's largest river, the Sarasvati, along whose banks flourished numerous towns and villages. Some 2,500 sites have been identified so far. Today, the riverbed runs through the vast Thar Desert. If it were not for satellite photography, we would have not learnt about those many settlements buried under the sand. The drying up of the Sarasvati River, which was complete by around 1900 BC, had far-reaching consequences. Just imagine the waters of the Mississippi running dry instead of flooding constantly. What havoc this would cause. The death of the Sarasvati River forced the population to migrate to more fertile parts of the country, especially east towards the Ganges and south into central India and Tamil Nadu. So why is this important for the history of yoga, you might ask? The Sarasvati River happens to be the most celebrated river in the Rig Veda, which is the oldest known text in any Indo-European language. It's composed in an archaic and difficult form of Sanskrit and was transmitted by word of mouth for numerous generations. Sanskrit is the language in which most of the yoga scriptures are written. It's related to languages like Greek, Latin, French, German, Spanish, and not least English. You can see this family relationship on the example of the word yoga itself, which corresponds to zougos in Greek, yugum in Latin, French yug, joc in German, and yugo, Spanish, and yoke in English. Sanskrit is like an older brother to the other Indo-European languages. Now, if the Sarasvati River dried up around or before 1900 BC, the Rig Veda must be earlier than the benchmark date. If that's so, then the composers of this collection of hymns must have been contemporaneous with the people of the Indus civilization, which flourished between 3 1000 to 1900 BC. Indeed, astronomical references in the Rig Veda suggest that at least some of its 1028 hymns were composed in the 3rd or even 4th millennium BC. Thus, the Sanskrit-speaking Aryans who created the Rig Veda did not come from outside India to destroy the Indus-Sarasvati civilization. They had been there all along. What then was their relationship with the Indus-Sarasvati people? Here opinions still differ, but there is a growing understanding that the Aryans and the Indus-Sarasvati people were one and the same. There's nothing in the Rig Veda to suggest otherwise. In fact, the Rig Veda and the other archaic Sanskrit texts appear to be the missing literature of the Indus civilization. Conversely, the archaeological artifacts of the Indus Valley and adjoining areas give us the missing material base of the early Sanskrit literature, an elegant solution to a problem that has long vexed researchers. So this means that yoga is the product of actually a mature civilization that was unparalleled in the ancient world. Think of it, as a yoga practitioner, you are part of an ancient and honorable stream of tradition, which makes you a descendant of that civilization, at least at the level of your heart. Many of the inventions accredited to Sumer rightfully belong to what is known as the Indus-Sarasvati civilization, which evolved out of a cultural tradition that has reliably been dated back to the 7th millennium BC. In turn, it gives rise to the great religious and cultural traditions of Hinduism, but indirectly also to Buddhism and Jainism. India's civilization can claim to be the oldest enduring civilization in the world. Its present-day problems should not blind us to its glorious past and the lessons we can learn from it. Yoga practitioners in particular can benefit from India's protracted experimentation with life, especially its explorations of the mysteries of the mind. The Indian civilization has produced great philosophical and spiritual geniuses who between them have covered every conceivable answer to the big questions, which are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. So there you go. A bit of an overview of the history of, I guess, where it all began. And of course, the interesting thing is that once we go a little deeper into the possibilities, I mean, that's only from what we know from a, archaeological, scientific research that has been done, but it keeps changing. Every few years they discover new possibilities. So that Indus civilization was likely flourishing around about 7,000 BC, so potentially 9,000 years old. So yeah, pretty old tradition and practice, eh? As far as our history understands. Any questions at all? We're going to have our little break in a sec and watch our movie.
Nikki, when it says Aryan, that's not like Nordic Aryans, right? That's like a different type of Aryan.
Yeah. Interesting. I think from what Hitler was trying to develop, is that what you're alluding to? I think from my understanding, I'd have to double check. From my understanding, Hitler, he took a lot of let's say a lot of information and magic from some of the ancient traditions. So so you even look at, let's say, the swastika, the Hitler's the Nazi symbol, which for all of us we see that as as an awful symbol, because it represents for us the atrocities that Hitler and the Nazis did in World War II. But that symbol, if you go traveling around northern India, that symbol is actually all over the temples in India. So the swastika is actually a spiritual symbol. It was around for thousands of years. It's been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So Hitler actually, he took that symbol and used it for his own purposes.
It's just reversed, right? That the
Yeah.
but yeah. But as in like the direction of it is.
Yeah.
But so true. I hadn't thought about that.
I've seen it in the same direction as well, but in India. But I think maybe generally it's the other way around. I'm not 100% sure. But basically, so I think even his idea of Aryan probably did stem from the ancient Aryans, who would have been, in theory, a highly evolved human species in some ways. So I think Hitler wanted to try and replicate that, and so then he gave it. He bastardized it in his own sort of way. But yeah, as atrocious and awful as the results were of what the Nazis did, he was drawing on some ancient mystical knowledge, which in its essence was maybe, let's say, a little bit more positive than the way he ended up using it.
Nikki, I have a question. When you speak about jnana yoga, how is that spelt? And what's
Gnana. It's a weird kind of jnana.
Jnana. Okay.
Oh, actually, sorry. It's no, it's Jnana. Jnana yoga.
Thanks.
Yeah. Jnana yoga. Jnana. Any other questions at all, or thoughts, comments?
My friends, a friend of a friend, has an Indian husband, and they have 2 kids, and one of their kids is called Aryan. So I should ask her what the difference is, because I'm sure that she knows. Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, look, when I was in India last, I was there 3 years ago, and I travelled up in Ladakh, and I visited some villages which were kind of off the beaten track, and the people there claimed to be descendants of Aryan people. That's
Yeah. Okay.
what they told us. They say, we are Aryans. Actually, we're not like the rest of the Indians.
Yeah.
And I think, look, I don't fully understand. It's not something I've really researched. I don't fully understand the history of Aryans, but it is said that in the Indus civilization, either the Aryans came in or they were Aryans. So whether they came from there, and then there is that kind of relationship with Alexander the Great as well, that he was somehow part of the Aryan people, and so in these villages in India, they talk about their descendants from Alexander the Great. So that Alexander the Great came through and conquered various places around the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and so they were part of that Aryan background or whatever.
Thanks, Michaela. I've just got a question just around the sutra, about the sutras. Like, is there kind of ongoing kind of debate and divergence of views and things like that about their meaning? Like, is that what kind of also gives the sutras that element of, like, you know, kind of lifelong study, and it's still a mystery sort of thing? Like, there's a lot of things being boiled up into.
Yeah, to some degree. To some degree, I think we just become better at understanding it. Yeah, I think more so with the Rig Veda. So mentioned there, the Rig Veda, the most ancient text, was written in a more ancient form of Sanskrit, which has kind of been lost a bit. So it's a slightly different, form or style of Sanskrit. So that's more the case with the Rig Veda. So I have a friend, for example, a very good friend who's quite an incredible person. But he lives in India at the moment. He's kind of got stuck there in COVID, so he's been there all year. And he's actually, that's part of his sort of mission. He's there translating the ancient Rig Veda and researching, you know, various aspects of it that really interest him. Yeah. And so he's found the most proficient Sanskrit scholars that he could possibly find, and together they're working to decode these ancient texts, and, you know, some really fascinating stuff that they're actually finding. And this is, I sort of have this connection with him personally, so I'm quite lucky to get some of this information, which I'm not allowed to divulge as yet, because he's going to obviously publish it at some point.
Yeah, amazing. Wow.
But I can tell you, hold on to your seats. Some really interesting stuff has been discovered from these ancient times.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
So you've got the gossip, Mickey.
I do. The gossip that I'm not allowed to share. Look, let's have our little break, because I'm hungry. I don't know about you guys, but this is an opportunity for us to have our lunch, if you haven't yet, or a snack. So look, there's this is a new one for me. What I like to do is on the history of yoga. Yeah, always play a little film. There's lots of different little films about the history of yoga. This one is not so much the history of yoga. It is, but it's also kind of an overview of yoga in general. So it's a bit about everything we've been discussing so far, but put into a nice, just it's an episode. It's part of a series called the Paths of Yoga, I think. Where is it? The Yogic Paths. So it's on Gaia. So I may have mentioned last week, Gaia is a great platform where you can do classes online, but it's also got lots of great documentaries and films which align to the yogis, and look, other people who might other things as well of interest. There's, you know, some wonderful series in Gaia. So this is a fairly new one. It only just came out last year, the Yogic Paths, and it's got, I think, 9 episodes of different aspects of yoga and looking into some of the different traditions and whatnot. And so this first one here is exploring the Yogic Path, and it's kind of a nicer produced movie as well. Some of the yogic movies that I've played in the past are a bit kind of old hat in a way. Still, lots of interesting stuff. I'll give you some more links at the end today if you want to watch some more stuff and explore in a little more depth in the week. But I think this would be a nice one for us just to watch today and maybe get a better insight. So I'm going to share the link here in the chat. So there it is. Oh no, that's not it. That's our Zoom link. Copy and share. There it is. So it's in the chat. Does anyone need it from the messenger? Would that be easier for some of you? Or you're all good with getting it from the chat? Look, the other thing I'll give you here is my phone number. We've got always various ways of contacting each other. Messenger is probably the preferred one. But if something happens that you're struggling to get on the particular link, or in future with our Zoom sessions or whatever, always feel free to contact me via the mobile as well. So feel free to save my number. So that movie goes for, I think it's 26 minutes 25. So let's come back at, let's say, around about 2:35. So you've got time to watch the movie and go to the toilet and prepare your lunch to watch the movie or whatever as well. So 2:35, back on Zoom here. Sound good?
So we watch the movie in the break?
Yeah, you watch the movie in the break. But we're kind of watching it together, but on our own as well. Yeah. So we can't share the popcorn around, unfortunately, this way. But yeah, it's this way I've found. Cool. See you all in 40 minutes.
Perfect.
Hello. How are we doing?
Good.
Hey, Flipper. Hey, Sue.
Hi.
Where's the kids today?
They're out at a park at the moment with Chris. Yeah, they might invade again soon, which is why I'm in a bedroom, so that, they have the run of the, they'll probably watch a film or something.
Cool. Hey, Vincent, welcome back. So, how did we go with that video? Interesting.
I haven't finished it.
Oh,
I'll watch it later.
that's all right. Are you on the way back from the park now?
Yeah, I'm on my car. I don't like to sit once I'm still. All the time I'm moving like mobile.
Yeah, it was good. There was a lot in it. One of my questions here was going to be about what's the relationship between the sutras and the Upanishads. So, it's so helpful to kind of cast some light on that. Like the Upanishads came first, and then hundreds of years or thousands of years later sort of came the sutras.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you were calling that the Rig Veda, is it? That comes from the Upanishads kind of thing.
Well, the Upanishads comes from the Rig Veda.
Yeah.
Or comes from the Vedas. I think from my understanding, the Upanishads is kind of like a collection or a summary of some of the Vedas, of some of the wisdom in the Vedas. But a lot of the Upanishads are actually just, some of them are sort of poetic, and then some of them are actually just like stories. So they're quite nice to just to read those stories. But quite different. I mean, I haven't read all the Upanishads. I need to get onto that. That's a fairly new one for me too, going into the Upanishads. I've read a couple of them, but I haven't read them all. But yeah, more, I guess, stories and poetry that is filled with wisdom and philosophical ideas. But the sutras are more, condensed. Like, okay, like they said in there, I think they said, well, this is the problem. Here's your solution. This is the recipe for the solution.
And to bring it all back together.
To get the result. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting, looking at the comparison between the kind of original purpose of like putting together that kind of, this is what yoga is, and it was about, people who had sort of chosen to remove themselves from society and like sort of make that commitment to finding enlightenment or whatever, and then that kind of transition into, I guess, making things more accessible for ordinary people, and that kind of historical shift and how that's developed over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess there's a few things about that. I mean, one is yoga from the tantric, looking at the tantric tradition, I guess, and tantra potentially has roots from thousands of years ago as well, but it was kind of popularized a little more during kind of the Middle Ages, and tantra became a part of yoga that was a bit more maybe accessible in some ways to the householder, to the general sort of person. Again, I don't want to go in too much depth about that right now, but I mean, not to get tantra confused. Often people confuse tantra with sexual yoga. That's just a I wouldn't say a misconception. I mean, it's not wrong per se. It's somehow a stream of tantra has gone that way, which has been, of course, popularized in the West because we're obsessed with sex and our bodies. So people often, when they hear, oh, tantra yoga, that's the yoga of the Kama Sutra or something. Well, no, it's not. In its essence, that's not true. Tantra yoga is, look, in a nutshell, tantra yoga is that yoga of the revering the divine within the manifest world. So revering nature. So it has it's in some ways it's a form of bhakti yoga. So it's that revering nature. So it's kind of like being in the world and celebrating the fact that we are in the world. So from the yogic perspective, the world that we live in, we call an illusory world. We call it the Maya. Maya is the illusion that we are living in. An illusion because none of what we are experiencing is permanent, and we know that. We know that our body dies, it doesn't last forever. All of nature passes, it goes, it comes and it goes. Everything in this world comes and goes. Nothing stays. So all of this coming and going from that philosophical perspectives means that it's not real in the sense of doesn't have a permanent reality to it. Although in some ways it does, in the sense that some of the essence within all of life has a permanence, and that's the idea of this kind of universal consciousness or God consciousness or creative energy. So yoga is about realizing that universal consciousness. That's the union aspect of my individual self with the universal self. However, we are here living in this world, as much as it might be an illusion, as much as it might not be real in that universal infinite aspect, we are still somehow, we're here in this, expressing ourselves through this body, on this, in this city, in this planet, with all the amazing things around us. So the Tantra is accepting the divinity, the beauty within all of life, and so revering that. So what I'm getting to is what you were saying there, Jacinta. There is this ascetic practice of yoga, of withdrawing from the world to, in some ways seeing the manifest world as a distraction to our self-realization. If we get too caught up in the world, then we stray from the path of realizing ourselves. So realizing universal consciousness. So that's where this kind of ascetic form of yoga came to be. What someone in that video said, that's the, yoga was kind of designed, or Patanjali's Yoga Sutras were written for the Brahmin ascetic, who was the guy who withdrew from the world. He didn't go to the parties. He didn't go and and have families. He didn't. He went and stayed in the temple, or and retreated to a cave in the mountains just to sit and meditate upon his navel until he realized himself. So that's in some ways why the Yoga Sutras can be challenging to both understand, but also to follow to some degree. So we need a little bit of freedom of interpretation and freedom of the way we actually follow these teachings. But yeah, definitely then what happened is around the turn of the last century, that guy that they showed there, Krishnamacharya, you see the guy who was doing all the asanas, the little guy, he revived the asana, or he actually kind of in some ways developed the asana, because he found the physical benefits and the healing aspects of the physical practice, and realized that was a way for general people who aren't withdrawing from the world to benefit from this practice. So he is in some ways revered as the godfather of modern yoga that we understand as of today, of hatha yoga, modern hatha yoga, which then all the various streams come from. So Krishnamacharya, who lived around, I think he was born towards the end of the towards the end of the 1800s, and then he lived a good 100 years. He only died sort of towards the end, 1980s or 1990s or something. So he was around for a good 100 years. He was a good representation of practicing yoga, how it can give you a nice long life. But he influenced and taught some of the other big influences within the modern day yoga. So Iyengar Yoga was one of his students. Iyengar, who then went off and started Iyengar Yoga. And then Patabi Joyce. Patabi Joyce is the guy who started Ashtanga Yoga. So Patabi Joyce and Iyengar were contemporaries, and they studied under Krishnamacharya. So we're talking probably 1920s or thereabouts, something like that. Maybe a little later. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe 30s. Maybe not 100% sure. But around it's probably a little bit later, 30s or 40s. But they learned from him, and his other great pupil was his own son, called Desikachar. And so between Desikachar, Iyengar, and Patabi Joyce, they went on and formed what is now a lot of the modern day kind of Hatha Yoga lineages then emerged from. So we've got Iyengar Yoga that obviously started Iyengar Yoga, which is still to this day a very popular form of Hatha Yoga practiced in many schools and many places, and very kind of Hatha Yoga, Iyengar Yoga is very focused on alignment, on physical alignment. So it's really fine tuning the awareness of the physical body. And then you've got Patabi Joyce, who started Ashtanga Yoga. That was his thing. And Ashtanga Yoga is, in many ways, is then the godfather of all Vinyasa style. So Vinyasa has its roots in Ashtanga. Ashtanga, let's say, is the original form of Vinyasa. I mean, Vinyasa could be said to be thousands of years old. I mean, I'm sure maybe back in Vedic times they might have practiced some form of Vinyasa even then, potentially, who knows. But as far as our modern day Vinyasa goes, we align a lot of that, or we owe a lot of that to the Ashtanga tradition as set out by Patabi Joyce. And then Desikachar was Krishnamacharya's son, whose focus became yoga therapy. So modern day yoga, so a bit more aligned with what Krishnamacharya was doing, but he developed that further. And so a lot of the modern day yoga therapy, so yoga therapy is another thing in the yoga world. So using yoga as a tool, as a therapy to heal. So this is sort of aligned with the Krishnamacharya via Desikachar stream. And then we've got all sorts of newer expressions of yoga which have somehow their roots through there, but then maybe borrow from other places too, such as, let's say, yin yoga. So yin yoga is a fairly new idea, but of course it has its roots in stuff that's been around forever. So yin yoga borrows a little bit from, crosses the continent over to China a bit. There's a bit of a borrowing from traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. So even some of the physical practices in China. but then also, of course, with Hatha Yoga to some degree. Yeah. I'll pause there for a moment and give you a moment to digest that. And also a chance to ask any questions at this point in time.
You know, with like the I guess the more modern style of yoga, like where they put you in a really hot room and it's really awful.
Hot yoga.
Yeah,
Bikram.
Bikram. So is that like a traditional thing that they used to do, or is that like a new thing? Because to me it sounds insane, but I'm just genuinely interested to see where that kind of fits in that lineage.
Yeah, good question, Jacinta. Yeah, it's an insanely new idea, I'd say. I mean, it's funny because I guess coming from India, let's say, yeah, but yoga really originates from India. In actual fact, if you ever go to India, it's in a lot of places, it's just the general kind of temperature is the same as it is in a Bikram yoga studio. You know, you just walk around and you're sweating balls just walking around doing nothing because it's 40 degrees out there in the middle of the day. So Bikram probably had the idea that, we should emulate the temperature of India in a yoga studio. So I would say that that's the reasoning behind the idea of hot yoga, or Bikram yoga. So again, Bikram is kind of like I'm pretty sure he was the first to invent this this style of yoga, this heated yoga, and yeah, basing it, I guess, on probably saying, well, yoga in India, it's that's how we practice. It's just the way it is. So, and there's benefits for practicing in the heat. You can go deeper, you can stretch a little further, but there's certainly lots of reasons probably why you shouldn't as well. I think it depends on everyone's body individually. So we all have our own unique constitution, and for some of us, we're quite aligned with a hot practice and a lot of heat. It'll serve us in a positive way, but then a lot of us, it'll actually be detrimental to us. So there's not a one size fits all in any of these practices, in any of these methods, and certainly, Bikram is quite unique in that way, and yeah, it's that kind of practice that's generally either loved or hated.
Mickey, I might be completely mistaken, but I heard that there was I think a documentary or something that came out to the effect that the dude who invented Bikram yoga was involved in some kind of scandal. I can't remember exactly the details, but I think
didn't he like rape everyone?
Fraud. Yes, something like that. Yes.
That's what I didn't see.
I could be totally mistaken. I don't know. I didn't watch it myself, but a friend of mine told me about it.
Yeah, I haven't watched it either, actually, and I have heard about that documentary. And look, I mean, his whole story is shrouded in all sorts of mystery and allegations. I don't know him personally. I've never met him. I don't really know much about him. I mean, from the little that I've seen of him or looked into him, I mean, he looks like an egomaniac on some kind of weird trip.
Yeah, I think there's a culty vibe about his studio that he set up or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, he doesn't really seem to embody to me the true yogi spirit. But, you know, I mean, I'm making a judgment from just an observation. So I don't know for sure, but from what you hear and from my little understanding, yeah, he's a bit of an oddball. You know, I think unfortunately fame can go to anybody's head, and you know, it kind of can bring out the worst in a lot of people. So I feel that that's probably what happened with him. He probably wasn't ever enlightened. He was just good at what he was doing and a good marketer and good coming up with a cool concept and yeah, and kind of distorted things, which is a shame because, you know, he's sort of, I mean, even a lot of, I know a lot of yogis have issues with him, even just the fact that he tried to trademark his sequence, things like that, which are kind of defeats the whole idea of yoga when you're starting to trademark ancient postures that have been around for thousands of years or whatever. Yeah, it seems a little bit off. But yeah, look, I mean, that's a very common theme, is that people who, I guess, come into some form of power to some degree, end up abusing their power. Unfortunately, if they're not self-realized, if they're not really fully aware of themselves, and then that often happens. It's a common story, unfortunately. You know, I mean, we need to recognize also that it's just a human thing. Sometimes if we see a footballer or someone, you know, in another, you know, look at politicians. God, look how corrupt and terrible most of our politicians are, and just people in general. They come into power and it distorts them, you know, it inflates their egos, and they get lost. And so of course we have more trouble when it's someone who's aligned with some kind of spiritual traditional spiritual path. So not to you know, discount if they've done some terrible things, but also maybe just occasionally to acknowledge the humanity that is there. You know, as humans, we're constantly just learning to kind of master ourselves, and there's lots of distractions, lots of temptations, lots of desires which are there for everyone, and so yeah, so sometimes even the seemingly more advanced people can fall or can be led down the wrong path.
I think similarly on that too, like, you know, you don't have to be like some kind of like hotshot guru to be, you know, really at peace or aligned or whatever you call it. Like, there's some, you know, brilliant people that are just, I guess, ordinary as well. Like, there's like that flip side. And it's really lovely to be able to learn from others, even if they're not, yeah, like gurus or whatever, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the human journey is there for everyone. We're all on this journey of life, no matter what we're studying or doing. And yeah, sometimes we can find the most incredible wisdom from some very, non-necessarily seemingly spiritual people or whatever. Absolutely. So what I wanted to bring up now, to also bring up, was actually we'll look at the manual, because it did mention something. I'm not sure how it's written here, but let's read that first. But in that other section of the history of yoga, which was page 64 maybe, can't remember now, let me scroll through. Yeah, 64. Page 64. So I'll just read this first quickly and then we'll try and make some sense of it. Tantra, the scripture of the ages. Mahavayugas. 1. Satya Yuga, the golden age. 2. Treta Yuga, the silver age. 3. Dwapara Yuga, the copper age. 4. Kali Yuga, the iron age or the dark age. In the scriptures of yoga and a lot of ancient cultures, there is said to be a cycle that rotates like the sun. This cycle is the natural rise and fall of consciousness of the manifest world. It's said that the universe manifested for the duration of one day of Brahman, and that it is reabsorbed in an unmanifested form for the duration of one night, Brahman. The day of Brahman is called Kalpa. It's said to last whatever that amount of years is, for something or other, billion, trillion years. The further division of this is the Mahayugas, as mentioned above. According to the scripture, we're living in the Dark Age and have been living in the Dark Age for 3,120 years before the Christian era. This era is said to be the era when living harmonium with the earth, humanity, animals, we are hardest. Doesn't make much sense grammatically, but anyway. This is when harmonious living falls to the lowest. There is an opportunity to refine your consciousness into golden age awareness throughout all times. Scriptures recommended for each time. Tantric scriptures for the Dark Age. Shruti scriptures for Satya Yuga. Puranas for Dwapara Yuga and Treta Yuga, the Smritis. Okay, so that probably makes no sense. So let me try and explain to you what is trying to be conveyed in that. I'm not sure where Amy got that from, why it was laid out like that, because, yeah, it doesn't make much sense, but I will translate for you. There was a who's heard of Yogananda? Heard of Yogananda? Guy Yogananda? He wrote a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi. Anyone ever read that book? Anyone read it?
We have it on my bookshelf, readily waiting, but haven't got around to it just yet.
I'm going to start just randomly recommending books, and that's one I'd put on the top of your list. Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda. a wonderful book, and one that's quite trippy. Yeah, it's like Yogananda goes around India, travels around India, sort of probably around about the time of Krishnamacharya. They were probably contemporaries, I'd say. Although Yogananda was more into the actually Kriya yoga, Raja and Kriya, let's say, more of a combination of those. So Kriya being certain exercises, you could call them, kriyas, like certain things that you do, like we often see in, let's say, Kundalini. So certain could be movements combined with breath work, certain rhythms that are there to awaken, let's say, Kundalini, or awaken some latent energy within us. Yogananda comes from this sort of tradition aligned to Babaji, who was this other guy who was around. Apparently, he lived for quite a few hundred years up in the Himalayas, and he was sort of practicing quite a lot around about the end of the 1800s. So he was the guru of Yogananda's gurus. But Yogananda was one of the other people who brought yoga to the West, one of the main people. So he came to America in the 1920s, and he spread yoga like wildfire to the West. He started up a thing called, I think, the Self-Realization Society or Fellowship, and to this day it's still quite prominent, particularly in America, in the States. And so there's a movie called Awake, which I recommend also if you get the chance to check out. I think that's on Gaia as well. I'll send you guys the link so you can watch it. Now, Yogananda was an incredibly enlightened being, and in that movie, it's really nice to sort of get to see him. You actually see him, not even though it was back then, but some of his stuff was filmed. Now he's not a hatha yogi. He's quite a chubby guy. You know, he's not your typical, hatha yogi who's seems like he could be starving. He's he's more into the Raja yoga and the Kriya yoga. So that's his thing. But his guru was a guy called, or one of his gurus, he had a couple of gurus, but his main guru was a guy called Swami Yuktaswar Giri. Yuktaswar Giri wrote this, so here he is here, there's Swami Yuktaswar. And this guy here wrote this particular book, which, again, another book I recommend. It's called The Holy Science by Yuktaswar Giri. And in this book, he introduces the idea of these yugas. So here is his diagram of the yugas. Now, the yugas are the ages, and they align in some way with our own idea of astrology. So you know how we talk about we're coming out of the Piscean age, moving into the age of Aquarius, and so that idea is every 2,000 years or so you got the different ages, yeah, from that astrology idea, which is a Western idea. So he actually in this diagram he aligns the yogic yugas as the yogic ages in alignment with the astrology of our Western ideas. and actually his book here, his whole purpose was to bring some kind of alignment with some of the Western spiritual ideas with the yogic spiritual ideas. So in particular, he's aligning a lot of the stuff from the Bible, because that was his kind of mission. He said, you know, his you think about in the 1920s when Yogananda went to America. I mean, America was a predominantly Christian country, and so that was, you know, the whole idea of philosophy and any kind of spirituality was based on the Christian doctrine. So Babaji actually gave this guy Yukteswar, said, look, your mission is to bring our teachings to the West, but to do that you're going to have to create some kind of alignment between, let's say, the Bible and our own ideas of spirituality. So it's really interesting when you start to read some of the stuff from the Bible, and then interpretations or alignments with some of the yogic philosophy. So that's one part of this book which is really interesting. But the other part is talking about this whole idea of the ages, and as it says here, the natural rise and fall of consciousness of the manifested world. So this also, and this is a challenging thing. This is something you don't have to believe me just blatantly. You can just potentially put this in the too hard basket if you like. We are kind of conditioned to believe things from a Darwinian perspective, yeah? So Darwin was the guy who came up with the theory of evolution, yeah? That we evolved from, you know, from apes or whatever, and then, you know, along the line we got smarter and smarter and smarter. Roman times, you know, Egyptian civilization, Roman civilization, Greeks, and to modern day man, whatever. But also from that Darwinian perspective is that, you know, that our history is maybe 10,000 years or something, you know, that maybe 10,000 years ago we were roaming around as apes. Now, interestingly, a lot of science and recent you know, geology and whatnot has discovered that actually, wow, we seem to be finding more and more ancient cultures which were a lot older than we initially thought, and in some ways a lot more developed than we thought. That this idea of a straight linear perspective of evolution, now it doesn't quite fit our recent findings. So this is something that you can check out. There's quite a few documentaries and stuff out there about this kind of thing. And look, this guy Yukteswar said it all back in the 1920s, or no, he would have written this in the 1800s actually. Oh no, maybe not that. Oh well, he died in 1936. So whenever it was that he wrote this book, doesn't say here. This is just when it was printed. But he wrote about it years and years and years ago, and he talked about this idea of how consciousness evolves and devolves. So there's an evolution, but there is also a devolution. And to me, it makes a lot of sense when you actually start to look at history. If you think about things this way, if you think about the ancient Egyptians and what we know of them, And even, let's say, the mystery of the pyramids, still to this day, no one can really say for sure how those pyramids were built. In theory of evolution, we didn't have the technology back then to be able to move those giant stones and put them up all, and then the whole, the structural aspect of it and whatnot. It still baffles modern day man as to how on earth did they build those pyramids, on the basis that, that's thousands of years ago when we were closer to our ape man's ancestors. So, and then when you also start to look at, I studied art at school, and I lived in Italy when I was young, and so we looked at Roman art, and then we also looked at Renaissance art. And so Roman art, the sort of the height of, let's say, the Roman civilization around about the time of Jesus, or maybe a bit before or whatnot, but 2,000 years ago, the height of the Roman civilization, and the Greeks as well. There was a certain certain beauty and profession in the art, in the architecture, in the literature, in the culture, and technology even in general, that then seemed to devolve. If you then look at the Dark Ages, then once all the Roman empires started to dissolve and the Greek empires dissolved, and then there came this time in around about the 500s, the 600s, which we now call the Dark Ages, called the Dark Ages for a reason. That there was a real dark time in history. There was a lot of plagues, there was a lot of destruction, and it seemed that even the consciousness of people seemed to have devolved. You look at the art of those times, it's not nearly as refined as the Roman art. You look at the architecture, everything seems to be at a lesser evolutionary place than what it was, say, 500 to 1,000 years before. So that in itself doesn't match the evolutionary trajectory. So it seemed like actually we devolved rather than evolved to that point around the Middle Ages where things were at their kind of at the height of the worst, where all that seemed to happen was rape, pillage, and murder. Like, if you look at history, if you really go and study history around about the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, life was not fun. It was not pretty. It was full of disease because, the infrastructure was terrible. And basically it was just the lowest form of evolution seemed to have hit human consciousness. It was all just about survival, just focused on pure survival, greed, and raping, killing, pillaging for to survive, survival of the fittest. And then after some time, around about the 1500s, there seemed to be this kind of like this movement out of those dark times, where the artists of the time started to look back at the Roman and Greek art and architecture and say, wow, look, wasn't the art and architecture amazing back then? So they started to try and replicate that, and that was called the Renaissance time. So we all know about Renaissance art, the Michelangelos, the Leonardo da Vinci, all the famous artists from the Renaissance time. And the word Renaissance means a resurgence of those supposedly much better times back in Roman times. And so that was the aim of the Renaissance artists. And so, from the Renaissance artists till now, from the Renaissance times till now, it's not that long. It's 600 years or so that have passed. In the big scheme of things, from the Renaissance to the Roman times was a lot longer time frame. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that in the theory of this evolution and devolution, we were constantly devolving for actually thousands of years, until we hit the peak of devolution around about the Dark Ages, which is called in this trajectory of the yogic philosophy the Kali Yuga, and then we came out of that, and now we're back on an upward trajectory. We are finally on this evolutionary path towards what will ultimately be the Golden Age. So we are now out of Kali Yuga, actually, even though some like to say that we're still in Kali Yuga. But according to Yukteswar, his theory, that we've come out of Kali Yuga and that we're in the Yuga called Dwapara Yuga. And each Yuga has a certain representation of the energy. So the Kali Yuga is very much based on the lowest form of energy, which is materialistic energy. So materialism, why our consciousness brought us right down to our lowest possible structure, focusing just purely on materialistic gain and focus. We're now in Dwapara Yuga, which is, according to that, the mystery of energy, which is, interestingly, of course, as soon as Dwapara Yuga started in the 1700s, all the energetic discoveries started happening. The electricity came into being, and then we're moving into the point of where we're at now. We're moving into the age of the internet and whatnot. So we're still quite, each yuga is quite different in timeline, but I think the Dwapara Yuga is about 2,000 years or so. So we're only just at the start of it. And then we go into the mental yuga, and then finally into the spiritual yuga. But we've got quite a few thousand years before we're going to get anywhere close to that golden age. So this whole cycle is 24,000 years. 12,000 years as a descending and 12,000 years as an ascending. And it's not just the yogis who saw things this way. The Mayas as well, the Mayan civilization, the Mayan calendar is also based on this idea. And a lot of other cosmologies around in different cultures can have the similar alignment to this idea. So what I'm going to do is actually, I think I'm going to show you that in a figurative form to make things maybe a little easier to understand, to comprehend.
Hey, Nikki.
Yeah.
Are there, in the books, I can't remember the name of the guy you just said who wrote about it. Does he talk about like a cause and effect aspect, or is this just sort of seen as a cyclic rise and fall that is of its own accord? How does devolution happen? Yeah,
well, it is. It's more of a cause. I guess. Look, it's a macrocosm of the microcosm. It's a cause and effect, in a sense that. That all of life on this manifest world, everything is born. It has a certain, time when it grows. You think of me as a human being. Yeah, I'm born. I have my childhood, so I'm growing up. I'm evolving to some degree, at least on the physical level. Mental level might be different, but on my physical level, I'm growing up. Then you get to a certain age, where you suddenly start devolving. Your body starts to get old, and then eventually we die. So, you know, we see it everywhere in life. You know, things flourish, they're born, they flower, whatever, and then eventually they die. So that's just the cycle of life. Now, what is said, and this is something I've read elsewhere, and this is not necessarily, it might be in his book as well, I can't remember, but there's a guy called what's his name, Drunvalo Melchizedek. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that guy. Drunvalo Melchizedek. He wrote a few books, but one called, he talked a lot about the 2012 as being the New Age time frame. And he talks about one book called The Serpent of Light. The Earth's, he talks about the Earth's Kundalini, and talks about the evolution and devolution of consciousness and of our different cultures. And his idea is that basically, you know, there's a fluctuation that happens on a big cosmological greater sort of aspect happening in the cosmos. So basically, our Earth and you know, and all our whole solar system, it slowly moves towards the center of the galaxy over 12,000 years, and then slowly moves away from the center of the galaxy for 12,000 years. You think about the way planets and everything rotates. You know, there's, you know, the sun gets closer and then it gets further. Everything, it's not just a straight path. You know, there's all these kind of fluctuations of going closer and further away. So the idea is that as it moves further away from the center of the galaxy, all consciousness upon our planet and probably our whole galaxy slowly devolves somewhat, because we're further away from the attracting energy of our life force. If the center of our galaxy is that, yeah. So as we move closer towards it, our consciousness expands, and so this cycle is 12,000 years. 12,000 years there and 12,000 years back, 24,000 years as a full cycle. Yeah, so that's his theory, and which, you know, aligns quite perfectly with this idea of the yugas. So, can you see this chart? Can we see the chart? Yeah. Yeah. So, so this is a representation of those yugas. So if we look at where we are here. We're present time. We've just kicked into what we call Dwapara Yuga. So this is the ascending. So you know, from here, this is the very lowest point, to there, the highest point. So we're back on the ascension path, which is good news. We'd probably much rather be here than, say, here, where we're heading into the depths and despair of the Kali Yuga. So it's brighter times ahead, although, as we can see, it says here 11,000, oh no, that's 11,500 BC is when that. So we got all these historical markers of what we understand. Obviously, that's the future yet to come, so we don't know. But yeah, that full cycle from top to bottom, bottom to top, is 12,000 years. So we are currently here in the present time. We've got, you know, Einstein, Newton, all these different people who obviously brought in the rise of the energy age of Dwapara, which yeah, as you can see, actually, according to this, we're still in Pisces. We've still got maybe a little bit of time before we head into Aquarius. Although this was written from, this present time was written from Yukteswar's time. It's already 100 years gone, so maybe we're a little bit further in now. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating when you look at it. You've got the AD 500 as being the lowest time of the whole scale in our devolution, the height of Kali Yuga. And I mean, what was going on then? Climate disruption, plague of Justinian, fall of Gupta dynasty, the fall of the Roman Empire, 499 epoch of the Rabata. I don't know what that is, but basically, dark times. And even though there was obviously some lights within the dark times, such as Jesus Christ was was somewhere in that time. He came along, obviously being put there to remind us that not all is lost. And
yeah, well, look what they did to him.
well, exactly, yeah. And see, even Patanjali. So Patanjali is not that far from Christ. He's there. Buddha's here. So all these people were in the Dark Ages. And so, yeah, I mean, you could look at all these different historical things, but basically, the idea is that if we can go back to, as far as we know, now we're discovering this things such as the Göbekli Tepe, which is an ancient civilization around about this time, which would have been, I don't know, 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago. That seemed to be a very advanced civilization in some ways. So on another scale, I think it's, what's his name? Drunvalo Melchizedek. He talks about, right, the height of the last golden age. So let's say around about here in the last, the last round. So if that's 12,000 years, so let's say maybe 14,000 years ago, around about here in the last ascending Kali Yuga, we had the civilization of Atlantis. Atlantis was the height of culture, and it was meant to be an incredible advanced technologically and also consciousness-wise civilization. But then obviously around about this time, when consciousness starts to dissolve, something happened and Atlantis was destroyed. So some say that the Atlanteans destroyed themselves with some kind of nuclear power that they developed, which was meant for good, but then because as consciousness started to devolve, then ego starts to dominate what previously would have been an energy of love, and so suddenly, if you've got this very highly sophisticated technology, which we see that today with a lot of our various friends around the world using technology for the wrong means. There's a good chance things will go pear-shaped. So that's what happened in Atlantis. So Atlantis went down. The Earth's Kundalini moved, because that's what it does every 12,000 years or every 14,000 years or whatever it is. It moves, and so while the Earth's Kundalini was there in Atlantis, being the crown of the Kundalini serpent of the earth. So the crown energy of the earth was focused in Atlantis. It moved because it was the time of Atlantis was up, and so it traveled all the way across to Mount Kailash in Tibet, which is where it's been for the last 12,000 years. So wherever the crown of the earth's Kundalini resides becomes the spiritual center of the earth. So for the last 12,000 years, it's no surprise that the spiritual center of the earth has been Tibet and India as the place from where a lot of the spiritual traditions have emerged. And then in theory, so sometimes, like a cataclysm happens, such as an ice age or some sort of climate change. It can be just that, or it could be potentially a cataclysm combined with maybe technology gone wrong, such as potentially was with Atlantis. I mean, this is all just, I'm just telling you a story now, whether you want to believe this or not. And I wouldn't say just believe me outright, but it's pretty interesting ideas, and there's a lot of, once you start looking into it, a lot of ancient civilizations have similar sort of stories and ideas.
To say, Mickey, sorry, I really struggle with the idea that we're not devolving now. I really struggle with that, with climate change, with just global, just the situation globally, with there are so many reasons why it's hard to believe we're not deep in Kali or whatever it is, or headed that way. But, I mean, that's, I know, so I wonder whether, that start date's slightly skew-if and we're actually just at the start of those dark periods. That's what it seems like to me. But
yeah, and you're not alone in thinking that, which is why a lot of people do say, oh, yeah, we are actually still in Kali Yuga. But look, I'd like you just to consider about, okay, we can get really upset with what's happening in the world today. We can get really, really down on a lot of the tragedies that are occurring right now, for sure. Some horrible stuff going on, which, begs to differ whether, gosh, if we have evolved out of the dark ages, why are people possibly doing what they're doing today? But look, I mean, when you think of it on a bigger, you got to sometimes take the bigger picture, and you think about, okay, well, really, what were things like back in the dark ages? Put yourself in the shoes of being around back then. You had, we complain about maybe, Black Lives Matter or, women's rights today. But think about back then. I mean, no one had any rights whatsoever. You were just meat for the person with the most power around.
Yeah, look, I agree. I mean, I studied sort of history in the Middle Ages and things, but I think the trajectory is this way from yeah, sure, this sort of technological enlightenment, and from universal suffrage and everyone sort of and minimum wages and all that sort of thing. We're going from a high point in the 20th century this way. I don't think we're going up, but so I just think as general trajectory, I think we're going back down, which is, I know things are better off now than they were back then, but I think and how they for the first time they've found that sort of life expectancies are on the way down. They're shortening. They're not that we've reached a peak. So my children aren't going to have that same life expectancy as the group before, because of all the things that are happening. So it's sorry, I always throw this sort of spanner in the works, but I just sort of, yeah, I mean, maybe it's slightly skew-if, or maybe it's not something that we need to necessarily embrace entirely if we sort of
I totally hear you, Sue, and you know, I question things too sometimes, and yeah, I can see that too to some degree. Like, you know, look at, okay, you know, think back. If I think back to when my dad was young, and the food they had was all you know, natural and good food, and now we're all getting this bloody GMO food full of chemicals that's, you know, that's killing us. Yeah, I mean, when you think of things like that, you think, Jesus, no, actually, we seem to be going on a downward spiral rather than an upward spiral. I agree, but I guess, you know, as I've sort of suggested, nothing's linear per se, and so even in this circular up and down trajectory, it's not necessarily a straight upwards all the way. Now there's probably some bumps and grinds along the way, you know, little roller coaster up and down, and yeah, and so maybe we are on a bit of a downward trend in that roller coaster ride at the moment. But look, this is all theory, but according to this theory, ultimately we are on this upward trajectory. So this one book that I've been reading on the yugas specifically, you know, talks about life expectancy, like you mentioned, and the average life expectancy of the age that we're in will be 200 years. But we're only just at the very start of this yuga, so it won't be for another maybe 200 or 300 years until that actually starts to kick in, that people start to live for 200 years. So yeah, so we're probably, I don't know, lucky or unlucky, depends which way you want to look at it, that we've landed right at this point in time. I mean, unlucky because we're having to endure the stupidity of a lot of our, you know, a lot of our ancestors, but lucky in a way that we have the potential maybe to be the influencers to make the positive changes to hopefully you know, hopefully sway that course and back up its ascending direction, which you know, we'd like it to be. But I understand sometimes we just want to pull our hair out in despair, thinking, my God, you know, what are we doing? Where are we at?
Just to chime in too, like I get completely where you're coming from, but I personally feel like the fact that we're having this conversation is like as Mickey said, it's probably something that like our predecessors or people that, like, even my parents, they would never really think about asking those kinds of big questions. They'd just be like, yeah, just as long as I get married and have kids and have a house and sod the rest of the neighborhood. Like, you know, there's no community spirit. Like, even in a generation, I feel like, unfortunately, yeah, we're having to deal with kind of like the remnants of a lot of shit. But
yeah, no, that's true. I mean, certainly, in terms of our enlightenment and education, there's a huge gulf between, you know, even what we have now and say 40 years ago at least. But then I just think as Mickey was saying, because I mean, I was thinking about, you know, that when we were younger and when our parents were younger, food was all organic. You didn't need to say it's organic because it was just, they weren't using these sorts of farming practices. So we're sort of like, we're just depleted. We have less resources. We're sort of, you know, we've got sort of environmental pollution. It's those things. I mean, I think you're right, definitely, about sort of the sort of levels of enlightenment and knowledge are pretty high. but I just wonder whether that's actually impacting our standard of living. All that, you know, we're still, I think we're plateauing, and we're probably going in the wrong direction now. And that's that life expectancy thing, you know, it's been going up and up for years, and now it's starting to level off, which is a worry. I mean, I'm just thinking of, you know, the next 50 years, and having small children, it's something that I think about all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I realize you do, Sue.
Sorry to hijack, but yeah, I mean, it's
not at all. No, it's an important questions to ask and important things to consider, and if we don't bring these things up and try and hold those accountable, you know, those who are maybe steering the ship in the wrong direction, hold them accountable, then we can't move through it positively. So I applaud you for doing that. But I think just, you know, we also need to maintain a sense of hope, and a sense of hope I think needs to be there, so that we can eventually move in the right direction. What I thought I'd do is give us all a little break. I think it'd be nice to have a little time off the screen for 5 or 10 minutes. It's 3:54, so let's come back at 4 o'clock. Yeah, have a little breath of fresh air, and then we'll come back.
Interesting having like the historical perspective of how things have developed over time. And although a lot of the concepts are quite sort of foreign, or not necessarily foreign, but you know, I sort of don't know where I sort of sit with them. I have never grown up with like having a spiritual practice. Like my family like they were sort of raised a bit religious, but not super religious. So it's not really like spirituality has never really been a big part of my life, and I've only really sort of discovered it over the last kind of 5 years through kind of like retreats and doing sort of like workshops and stuff. But I always sort of call myself a bit of like a 1 foot in, 1 foot out hippie. Like, so I think that concept that you sort of mentioned of like just considering things and exploring things rather than having to like agree 100% or disagree 100%, like being in that gray and just sort of like allowing that stuff to, I guess, wash over us. It's a kind of a nice thing for me to do, because I think that sometimes I can be a bit black and white and a bit sort of like focused on like, oh, where do I align myself? And so that's been a big thing today. I think also too the just the richness of the history, especially like considering like what we've lost over time, and what, you know, there's so much of the world that we don't know, that we, you know, haven't been exposed to. And so it's sort of really exciting, this idea of like being able to learn a little bit about it in the time that we have. Not that I'm going to be a, you know, genius by the end of it, but like the kind of possibilities, I guess. And I've also just kind of enjoyed just having a space to kind of sit and just consider, like, this is probably just all sounding very like obvious to some people, but it's just not, it's not a usual aspect of my life to have that kind of luxury, I think, to just ponder and just think about things. You know, it's really lovely, but very foreign. So that's probably it.
That's good, thank you. And No, good call there, and it's so true. I mean, show this one book that I've got. I've got a book called Ponder on This. When I did my teacher training, this was the philosophy that they looked into, the Alice Bailey writings from the Theosophical Society. And so this just happens to be one of the books, which is a collection of ideas, you know, and it's in alphabetical order. So you just turn any page and human races. So pondering on that, identity, illumination, the mind. So all different, you know, diet, death, attachment, aura, all different ideas and things to consider. And yeah, this is very much, I mean, maybe you weren't so aware of the fact that a yoga teacher training could be also, you know, a dive into philosophy in some ways as well, and an opportunity to look at different ideas and different ways of looking at the world and ourselves. But I don't think it you know, it couldn't not be, because yoga is essentially, it's the practice of self-inquiry, of understanding who we are in the world, in ourselves and in the world. So yeah, pondering on things is an important part of the process. And yeah, and look, and that's the challenge, isn't it, in our everyday life out there? If you know, to have time to ponder on things, you know, we feel, oh shit, you know, I'm just wasting time here. There's no means to an end here. I'm not earning money out of this, or I'm not, you know, achieving anything, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's in the decision. Like, I think a lot of my life is spent analysing and then making a decision. But it's quite liberating exploring without that doing, I guess. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good. Oh, thank you, Jacinta. How did you go, Vincent? Are you ever a Vince?
Yeah. I'm you know, Vince, Vincenzo, Vinny.
Is it Italian background? Vincenzo? No.
Yeah. Oh no, nah, but like, I guess friends, you know, like always call me different names and that. I'm actually Mauritian by heritage.
Ah, okay. I was trying to work out where that Reboud. How do you say it? You spell it?
Reboot.
Reboud. Yeah, I was wondering where it was coming from.
Yeah. Yes. What am I going to say? Yeah, it's been good listening. I was actually interested in the whole cycle of the yugas and that, like, and also you mentioned how it sort of links up with the other sort of astrological calendars, and I think you were saying as well, like how it sort of links up to like how in the, I don't know what the Piscean age or like what astrological calendar that's part of. Well, I sort of do, but I don't know. I find all that stuff pretty interesting, and yeah, and also just all the other stuff that we've gone into today, like the history of the practice and how, you know, someone sort of brought it to the non-Brahmin caste and like allowed other normal people sort of jump into a bit more of a normal practice, whatever you want to define as normal, because before it was just more sort of left for the people who are going to go into a cave or a temple. And I don't know, I can give you a bit of a play-by-play of bits and pieces that we've gone over today, like, that I've found interesting. And then that video, like I find video, and I'm an audio and visual learner. So like that video that you sent to us, like I found that pretty helpful, like in regards to complementing what you were telling us about the sutras and the religion and the belief systems, X, Y, Z. You know, like I might start delving. So I think I had a subscription to them, of that Gaia site back in the day. Might get another one and start, you know, looking into the docos here and there in it, because it seems pretty interesting. So yeah, that's me.
That's good, man. Yeah. I mean, I do. I do encourage, if you guys can, to subscribe to Gaia. It's a wonderful source of information. Lots of good videos and lots of good movies there. I mean, I use my daughter's Netflix subscription, and I really struggle to find anything interesting on Netflix. But Gaia, I really find there's lots of really interesting stuff there. And look, and the other thing is, I mentioned it last week, so you weren't here, Vincent. But I mentioned also that it's expected, or at least highly encouraged, that you guys attend an average of at least 3 classes a week. That you go to 3 yoga classes a week. So obviously, at this point in time, when we're not able to go into the yoga studios, that's the only way we can do that is online. So, I mean, one way is you can join one of the online studios, such as Summer Healing. Summer Healing's got a really good online program. But Gaia is another option. Gaia's actually got some lots of classes, and sometimes that's nice because it's at call, whenever you feel like you want to do something, and you can decide how long a class you want. So I'll I mean, if you've already got subscriptions or whatnot, I've got my partner subscribes to Gaia, so I'm using her subscription now. But I'll send you a link that I don't know if the link gives you some discount or something, but it's pretty cheap anyway. It's only like, I don't know, $14 a month or something. So it's worthwhile. Cool. What about, let's see, Grace, do you want to share anything?
Yeah, sure. I really resonated with what Jacinta said about designating a space in order to just be able to explore concepts that normally, I guess, you feel like you maybe just don't have the time to validate that exploration, to discuss, and it's to not be attached to a particular outcome. Not that it has to be something that will help you do something that will make you money, or you're just doing it because you want to know, like you're curious. So I've really enjoyed like the discussion aspect of it, the cycles aspect as well. It's like, I feel like it ties quite a lot into what we were talking about with the beginning, about the polarities of the self, and how the light and dark, and sun and moon, and how there's this, it's this way, but it's also like the complete opposite. And the cycles also for me resonate, like they resemble that. There's like this aspect of things getting better relatively, but then you could look at specific things and say that, like, we talked about food and crops and things that, like, at one point there was no other option but to eat a particular way. Then now it's like people have to pay an excessive amount of money in order to live that way. And so there's like that sense of balance or sense of polarity in that as well, which has been really great to just have somebody like say, this is 5 hours for you to explore that, which is nice. I actually wanted to suggest, like, from that conversation, there was a book that I read at the beginning of the year that really helped me through a bit of a difficult time processing a lot of stuff that was going on. It was at the time of the bushfires and things, and I finished it just as COVID started happening, and I felt like, you know, it had really helped me kind of embrace the period. So I might just send a link on the Facebook group, and obviously, like, just in case, you know, you guys are interested. It's by a guy called Charles Eisenstein, who's pretty big anyway, but yeah. Yeah, I think that's most of what I've taken from today. Oh, and yeah, if we could get the link for the Gaia thing, that would be great. Yeah.
Sure thing. And yeah, good point. I mean, that's part of this, you know, this connection that we're making with each other, is to also, you know, share anything that that could be inspirational with each other. So so that's, yeah, I encourage you to use that Facebook chat as much as you like. I mean, not to get too off topic with it. I mean, sometimes these Facebook chats, you know, people can go on tangents or whatnot. So keep it to, you know, more or less what we're doing with our yoga, or things that are helpful within, you know, within the context of what we're exploring. But yeah, by all means, any thoughts, ideas, any recommendations, you know, put them there in the group chat. Good stuff, Grace. Philippa, have you got anything to share? You're muted still.
Yeah, I'm on mute. Oh, hang on, now I've got a thing. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting today. I'm just still pondering all of the yugas, and I guess it's all kind of what strikes me out of that is just the absolute sort of vastness of time. And, you know, not to, again, getting off topic, but it's sort of also, like, I guess what Sue was sort of talking about there. I've been reading a book at the moment that's called The Sixth Extinction, and it's about kind of basically what we are going through at the moment is considered widely by scientists to be part of the sixth mass extinction. And it sounds awful and it sounds terrifying, but yet when you read the book, there's actually real comfort in understanding, like, how these things happen across the vastness of time. It's like, you know, we've had 5 mass extinctions in the last kind of 500 million years. And, you know, they look at clay and things like that and see, you know, be able to sort of see what happened with the earth and so on. And it just kind of, I guess, it sort of puts it into context that we can kind of, you know, get sort of all caught up about how much sort of power and influence we sort of have as humans around, you know, what we're doing to the world and things like that. But the world is, and I think this is a bit like the actual Gaia philosophy as well, like the world is kind of just is such a monumental force. It's comprised of such monumental forces itself. That, you know, almost like the world will be fine. It's just humans might not always be here. But anyway, I didn't want to get off topic, but it's just kind of raised a couple of things for me as well, I guess, because it's sort of been that thinking just through the sort of like the vastness of time and what that means. And I guess with looking into the history of yoga as well, it kind of just the same type of thing sort of struck me, like just having that context, I suppose, around yoga and how it developed as an idea and a practice, but also how it has been something that has been able to evolve with the ages and have as much meaning now, or for, you know, someone kind of sitting in the city with a whole set of different beliefs and ideas as it did for, you know, Brahman aesthetic in a way, like, you know, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. So I found like that side of it, the context and the continuum of time piece, really interesting. And then also as well, because I mean, I used to be a lawyer, and so I kind of like a bit of architecture to things, like a bit of sort of system architecture to kind of try and understand things. And I was also a little bit like, oh, I don't even really know how to kind of go into, you know, the sutras or the limbs or the styles or anything like that. So both the video and even just kind of talking about, you know, how all of those kind of parts sort of fit together in a bit of a almost like an architecture, if you know what I mean. I'm kind of like a mind map sort of thing, I think, with it. Has been really useful to me. It sort of almost feels like a little bit of a way in to kind of now sort of understand those things. Because I think before I was thinking like the sutras had something to do with, you know, the asanas. And I guess also the other thing that kind of struck me as well, I was sort of thinking in my mind, like with those 8 limbs of yoga, and then when you have different styles of yoga, how some, I think like we said, like Hatha sort of, you know, uses or refers to kind of all 8, but not all do. So I kind of suppose I sort of, you know, I'm imagining that almost as like, you know, you've got bubbles, and some of them, for different styles of yoga, some of those limbs are really big and some are small, but also how it's also kind of integrated. I think that was sort of another piece that came out that I found really fascinating, like just around, it's just like it's all just so kind of integrated, be it through this sort of spiritual devotion, chanting type stuff, intellectual side, the physical side, the meditation, you know. So I just kind of got really excited because I thought there's just so much to explore here. So it's unsurprising that it becomes a bit of a kind of lifelong journey of learning for people. I can see that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philippa. Yeah. Some great observations there. Love it. I was just thinking there, something that came up for me while you were speaking was the talking about the architecture and as far as the mind map of things, of the progression of where things are at. One thing that didn't get mentioned in that film, and which is also which I forgot to mention, is, I suppose, the another important text called the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And that was written in the 15th century, so in the 1400s sometime. And that is, I guess, another important text to just to consider, because that was the first written text that we're aware of that actually starts to list all the asanas and lists a lot of the practices, not just asanas, I think the pranayams and the various practices. So in the big scheme of things, that comes quite a lot later. But also, I mean, you know, in our linear history, it's still quite a while ago. It was in the 1400s. So that becomes like a bit of a foundation of a lot of the modern day yoga, Hatha yoga practices, actually listed in there. So another text to just mention on that in the history of yoga, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. That was the first book, as far as we know, that actually starts listing the asanas and the techniques and whatnot. Sarah, would you like to share anything with us? How did you go today?
Yeah, actually, I really like. I couldn't capture all this contents because I was like on the move all the time. But you know, yes, funny enough. Yeah, I really like the way that I mean the yoga and its history. It's go back to 5,000 years ago, and how it developed over the years in different forms. And I usually like myself was always black and white, and I like the yoga practice that's helping me to just like be much in present and like control the fluctuations of my mind. And also it was interesting for me to know that Buddha was trying to understand that what is the purpose of life, and he wanted to search and explore that is that the way in order not to die finally. And as you said, like some people, some yogis try to and they live for 200 years, and this is what's Buddha trying to search and trying to find a way to like against sickness and like this. And yeah, I like that the way, I mean, the yoga practice, there's the meditation and the integration of the physical and spiritual techniques. That's and its harmony and the sound, like as you said, it's like from the crown of the head to the foot. I mean, there are lots of chakras, and really it helps for removing the blockage in any way. And yeah, that's it. And yeah. I like yoga because you said I mean, the yoga is life and creation and the way of self-exploration. Yeah.
It's great. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, some great points you brought up there too, and I think a lot of the things you brought up there we will be exploring a lot more at a deeper level. Yep. Interesting about your point about Buddha and I guess yoga in general about finding ways to extend life or to beat death. And I guess one of the things that yoga does, that part, a lot of this spiritual work is moving towards. It's more so actually embracing death and losing our fear of death. Ultimately, I think that's probably the biggest fear that everybody has is the fear of death.
Yeah, this is something that is like South American. They have just worshipped some kind of like idols, that these idols represent the death, and they worship it like as a kind of their it's a culture. And in Colombia, I think, Colombia or Mexico. Yeah.
Mexico, the day of the dead, where they
Yeah, the day of the dead,
worship
exactly.
the ancestors and those who've passed and died, and they welcome them back, I think, to come back.
And they just give a burst that day is just like they give they make cakes and like celebrate that they birthday. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never experienced that. I've seen images of it. It looks amazing. Looks like an amazing celebration. But yeah, it is like a celebration of death. And yeah, look, very much that's part of this, as I said, part of the spiritual practice is to be able to overcome our fear of death. And then that's quite a deep level there that we're talking about. The fear of death, as it is, as I suggested, it's one of those ingrained things that's there for everybody to some degree or not. But when we, I mean, if we're able to have those deeper enlightened states within this lifetime, then we realize that death is just another chapter. It's not the end of all. It's just the end of this particular body that, like an old cloak, we throw it away and then another one comes on. But for sure, also the practice gives us the potential to be healthier and more vital. And so even just to be able to have a longer life is nice if we're called to live a longer life in this incarnation. But yeah, that's a whole other ball game, kettle of fish, rabbit hole. we won't go too much into that right now. But thanks for sharing that, Sarah. Wonderful. Ali, what would you like to say to us?
Have I unmuted myself?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So one of the biggest things that came up for me today was just around the different translations and transliterations. So each word, it's not just one definition, as we might usually think of it in an English sense or Western sense. There's so many different interrelated meanings and definitions depending on which perspective you're looking at that word or concept from. Also delving into the different styles of yoga and their origins more deeply, sort of tied together what you had presented last week, and then watching the video and just seeing those diagrams where it had, you know, these are all the different types. It's something I'm going to go away and just, you know, draw for myself to enhance my understanding of each one and how they kind of interrelate. What else? Yeah, and I just found the history fascinating because I've never formally studied history. So then, yeah, just yeah, there's just so much content today, and yeah, it's something I'll definitely be yeah, reading over and revisiting and thinking about over the course and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ali. And that's given me a great idea because you know, every lecture I'm supposed to give you some homework as well. And sometimes the homework's written in the book, and a lot of the time I've got to make it up, and then sometimes I don't like the homework in the book, so I give you something else anyway. But I thought that the homework you're giving yourself is actually a great idea, and that's the homework I'd like all of you to give each other, to give yourselves, rather. So yeah, so just consider, okay, what are the different streams of yoga? But not to get confused about the different types of hatha yoga. So I don't want to see Yasa, Ashtanga, Yenga, Bikram. I want more. What was in that diagram that we saw in that movie? Yeah. So you've got the link of the movie. If you need to go back and check the movie, you can, and then give yourself a little pictorial. Create your own little pictorial representation of that, like, you know, your own little mind map of what are the different types of yoga, and maybe just a sentence or underneath each of those of what the focus is, you know. Bhakti yoga.
You mean
yoga,
like the
yoga
limbs?
devotion. Sorry?
Do you mean like the 8 limbs of yoga? Is that what you mean?
No, like the different types of yoga. So essentially Bhakti yoga, Tantra yoga,
Yeah, okay.
Hatha yoga, Raja yoga, Karma yoga. I think I'm pretty much told them all now. Kundalini yoga, and then, look, and that's not really definitive either. Yeah, so it's just what you picked up. So you may just want to quickly go back on that video and just check in again, and yeah, and just for yourself, so a little kind of mind map of that. And so the idea with your homework is obviously is to often it's a little summary of what we've discussed in the lecture. Often that's what the homework is. Sometimes it's specific questions to answer or specific, you know, so, I mean, a lot of the time our homework will be on, you know, on some of the asanas as well, you know, list 10 twisting asanas or whatever, and you know, show us list their benefits or something like that, you know. But the idea is that try as best you can is to collate, just, I mean, this is really for your own benefit, but to collate your homework into a book of sorts where ultimately that becomes like your companion to your teacher training manual. So, you know, this is for your own benefit, and so you can make it as simple or as elaborate as you like. But, you know, it depends on where you want to go with it, really. Any questions on that?
Sorry, everyone. That was.
I know. I had another idea. I think your idea was a lot easier than what I was going to say. No, you've done well. Elena, what would you like to share with us?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Alexandra only has to open her mouth, and all of a sudden, all of us have to do a mind map assignment. Comes as no surprise, but really, all jokes aside, I'm actually pleased that we have to do that, because I very much agree, Philippa, with what you were saying. The way that my mind works, I'm actually deeply impressed by the depth of understanding and the insight everyone seems to already have, because I certainly don't at this point. And I sort of felt throughout today's session presented with so much information, a lot of which is of a metaphysical and completely intangible nature. The words that are used to describe the material are in Sanskrit, and like Alexandra said, have an almost infinite array of interpretation. So it seems to me to be even more impenetrable than when I began. So I think I'm going to have a good lie down after this. Just spend a little bit of time trying to consolidate. And like Philippa said, I think it could be very beneficial to have, just for basic people like me, a bit of a more structured overview of what we're dealing with. Because at the moment I've just got a mind full of all these terms, sutras, Upanishads, all these authors. Even the names of the people that we're talking about are so foreign and so unfamiliar to me that they're all blending into one. So I think I need to have a good lie down and do a bit of reflection and hopefully consolidate some of what we've been presented with today. I wouldn't even call my understanding learning at this stage.
Thank you for sharing, Elena. And I apologise if I've got a little too esoteric with you too soon.
Not at all. No, not at all. But I think it just, I knew it was a very complex subject that I was entering into. But like I said, I feel like I've come away today even more bewildered than when I started.
Oh dear. Look, this is, I guess, just because being the fact that we're supposedly only doing the beginning online and then going into the studio. I guess normally we would start just with what you already know, exploring asana. So we would start just by practicing some moves and going through the breakdown, postures and that kind of thing. But and then a lot of the philosophy comes a bit later usually. But due to the current situation that we find ourselves in across the world, particularly here in Melbourne, this seemed to make more sense to dive into the philosophy while we're confined to our homes. And once we're in the studio, then we can. We could have, and we can do the asana work online. But it's better, I think, if we can do it together in real life. So that's why I decided to do it this way. So in that regards, maybe I would be a little gentler in introducing some of the esoteric stuff to you all instead of like.
Don't disadvantage everyone else. Maybe not everyone's as basic as me. I don't know. It could just be me. Sorry, guys.
I totally resonate with what you're saying as well. Like, and I think that's what I was sort of saying with my point. It's like, I'm just gonna sit here and explore it. I don't need to get it, but I can just have that space. But no, totally resonate with what you're saying. So don't feel dumb or anything. Like,
Yeah, good. And so remember, don't forget you got your 2 heart basket, always carrying that with you at all times. And don't be afraid just to put stuff in there at any time. Don't feel you have to get it all. For me, it's decades of exploring, really. In more so in a decade and a half, but yeah, it takes time to really understand or acknowledge even just a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think when you said last week that your teacher training course was 900 hours, my initial thought was, shit, what did they talk about in 900 hours? But now I realize, yeah, it probably would take at least that long to get your head around. 200 hours is, I think a lot of things are going to have to go into the 2 heart basket, unfortunately, in 200 hours.
Yeah, but as I said, that's your 2 heart basket that you'll carry for the rest of your life, and slowly bits and pieces will come out and will unravel along the way. Sue, lucky last.
Yes, I'll keep it brief, knowing that I'm last, and also everyone has covered a lot of what I would probably say. I've been really spaced out today, so I probably retained even less than usual. But saying that, I find there's a whole new vocabulary that I'm coming to grips with, and as people have pointed out, there are different definitions. There's quite complex concepts. I need to go back and do a bit of reading. I think, as Elena said, and Philippa, I need a mind map. So it's and you can see obviously the bits where I can apply some knowledge that I already have or think I have, I'll pipe up. But it's going to take some time for all of the concept, for a majority of the concepts at the least, to kind of sit with me so that I'm able to engage and understand. At the moment, sorry, my kids have decided to play some music just at this moment. But yeah, so I feel as if I need to let things percolate. I really feel like and there's a lot that because all of us are coming to this, and they're entirely, well, I'll speak for myself, but I feel as if it's an entirely new language and way of thinking, and I will always try to graft on things that I know, but I think I need to sit back and just let it hit me. And there's a lot to know, a lot to learn. So that's where I'm at today.
Great, thank you, Sue. And I'll just mute you because I think you were reverbing. Yeah, great. That makes a lot of sense too, everything you said there. So
Could you suggest some? Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just gonna say, just on that, could you suggest some reading as to where to start with, related to the homework or whatever? Is there a place that we can focus?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do that for sure. Yeah, I'll send you some links for. I'll send you some links for that. I'll send you some suggestions on what you could explore before next lecture if you want to get a heads up. So basically let me just double check, but I'm pretty sure I put down for next week Yoga Sutras.
Yeah, because I've got all these books, but I don't know what to do with them, and I feel very overwhelmed by all of that stuff.
Yeah, Yoga Sutras next week. I think I'll switch those two around. Yes, so Yoga Sutras next week, and our first dive into the Yoga Sutras, we'll actually go into Pada 2. So we'll skip Pada 1, Pada being the chapters. Remember, there's 4 chapters of the Yoga Sutras. We're going to explore chapter 2. Chapter 2 being the focus, the 8 limbs of yoga. So that'll just help understand the overall practice of yoga a little more. Because then chapter 1 is more about, okay, what's the issue here? So it's going into the aspects of the mind, which, you know, it's almost a bit more psychology in some ways, from a yogic perspective. So I think, you know, chapter 2 is a little bit more practical to some degree. There's still esotericism in there, but and I think Jacinta and Sue, you both probably come across some of that in my retreats. I'm sure I've gone into the 8 limbs before. So so yeah. So if you want to get a step ahead, you start to do some reading on chapter 2 in your Yoga Sutras book. Hands up who's actually got the Yoga Sutras book already. So most of you, yeah, okay. So just...
is that this one or is that the other one that you talked about?
Either or. Either or is fine. They're both...
So is it still chapter 2 that I need to read?
Yeah, as in, so it's not specifically chapter 2 in that book.
Oh.
It's on Pada 2 on the second chapter of the Yoga Sutras, which is the it's the Samadhi Pada, Sadhana Pada. So yeah, Sadhana Pada. Now that I'm taking you there, Sadhana Pada, that's in this version. I don't have the core version yet. Mine's still on its way. But I've got this version, the Light on the Sutras. But you should also have a Sadhana Pada chapter in the core of the sutras. And it's also just being a little bit, in a way, you know, we don't necessarily read things from back to front here. You know, have a look at the introduction, have a look at, you know, the, I don't know, in this book here, one of the chapters is towards the beginning called the Yoga Sutras, and it sort of runs through them as a summary. So you could read all of that to get an overview, and then you could, then in the next chapter, it's the themes in the 4 padas. So maybe look at the themes in the second. I mean, it depends how much time you want to give yourselves. And so I'm not saying to read the whole Sadhana Pada, not to read the whole chapter. I mean, you can if you want, if you have the time. But just to start to get a bit of an overview of what's going on. So just read whatever you can. For those who don't have their book yet, I mean, you can look it up online. I'll write it. I'll write it in our group chat. What you're looking for, and if you don't have the time, that's fine too. Don't worry about it, because that's what we're going to be talking about next week. But it's just, I guess, for those who want to have a bit more of a step in. And yeah, Philippa, you're holding the Osho book there too, aren't you? Yeah. So the Osho book also, that if anyone's got that book, that one is also about the Yoga Sutras. So that also has Osho's, and for some of us that might be better actually. Maybe Elena, have you got that book, or you got that book on the way, the Osho one? Have you got the Osho one?
I bought all of the ones that you screenshot the cover on that group chat. So I think I bought 3 or 4.
Right. So
Upanishad. I think, yeah, that one there. Philippa, can you hold that up? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that looks familiar. Yeah, I think I bought at least 3, if not.
That might be in a language you might be able to understand a little more. Osho's he's a great author. You know, he writes.
This is the only one that's arrived. I don't know why. These were like, they must have more of these in stock, but the others are on order. They're just waiting.
All right. So if you don't have them yet, then you've got to contend with that. But the Osho book's actually, it's really nicely written. So it might be a little bit more accessible as far as
yeah.
You know,
the Osho book has got a picture of Osho. I'm assuming it's Osho with his beard, but a beanie and a pair of huge like grandma sunglasses on it. Really, yeah, very telling. And it says spiritually pragmatic. Sounds like it's a pretty good book.
Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, I mean, all of Osho's writings are beautiful. He writes really beautifully. You know, he's another one of those, you know, contentious yogis. You know, some people again love him and hate him. I don't know, there was that.
Wild Country. The
documentary that was on Netflix. Actually, that's one good documentary on Netflix. So he was very contentious. Is that the word? Yeah,
that's pretty fitting.
But look, I mean, yeah. Again, I can't judge. I never met the guy, but definitely his writings are beautiful. You know, there's some of the things he did. It's more so, I think, some of his organization did, and I think it was that crazy woman that ended up taking over his things. That was the mad one, really. But I actually have a couple of friends, older friends who spend time with Osho personally, and speak very highly of him. So he was a really incredible and enlightened person. So yeah, but then other people say terrible things about him. So, but yeah, definitely that his writings are wonderful. Highly recommend checking into some Osho now and then. Well, team, that has now brought us up to 5 o'clock just about. I thought we were going to get off early, but that's what often happens. We end up chit-chatting away. Any questions or anything before we shut up shop for the day?
I just want to say I actually like the chit chat. That's like, you know, I think it's important.
Yeah, and I will keep encouraging it. It's part of the training, definitely. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful to have you all on our second session, or first for a couple of you. And Catherine never came back. Kat disappeared. She didn't return on the second round, did she?
Yeah, she said in the group she had to go and to carry on without us.
Ah, okay.
There you go.
I think she's going to extend the course for the next year, like next intake.
Ah, did she say that?
Yeah, something like that on the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, she's already done that once. Maybe she needs to do it a couple more times. Who knows? Thank you very much, all of you, for coming and for your presence. And I will send links to all those things. Remind me if there's something I don't send of. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.